Hi guys, welcome back to AHGP. Today is another feature episode and I'm joined by a very special guest, a friend of the show. We're going to be discussing Fernando Alonso, Pierre Gasly and Nico Hulkenberg and their moves in the driver market and deciding which one we think is going to be the most successful this season. My guest today is George Howson from the F1 Chronicle. So without further ado, editing Aaron is going to put that conversation onto the screen or into your ears and enjoy the show. There are 6 driver changes for 2023, and today we'll be looking at 3 moves in particular. Two-time world champion Fernando Alonso has left Alpine again for Aston Martin, while Pierre Gasly fills the Spaniard seat at Enstone. And it's Hulkenberg once again as German driver Nico Hulkenberg returns and joins Haas, replacing Mick Schumacher. With me today to discuss which of these moves will be most profitable in 2023 is a friend of the show, George Howson. Hey, George, how are you? Tell us about your motorsport involvement.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me back on, Aaron. It's good to be back. It's been about a year since we've come on this show. Just to pay back a little bit for coming on Grid Talk so much this last year. But yeah, I mean, I'm involved with the F1 Chronicle, obviously with Grid Talks. I'm the OH, as I say, the original host. I don't host so much these days, I'm more in the background, but yeah, so check out that as well. We do the all the previews, the reviews, and everything in between. So, and every now and again I write about Formula One as well. So yeah, that's kind of my background with everything.
Excellent. You're the first person to come on to the channel 3 times. So yeah, you really are a true friend of the show.
I will take that very gladly. That's a very nice title. Thank you.
No problem. Before we dive into the trio of driver moves that we're going to be discussing today, I just want to get your thoughts on the Andretti Cadillac and FIA versus FOM thing that's kind of causing a bit of a storm in the Formula One world at the moment. What do you think of the Andretti Cadillac bid? And do you think they should be making it easier for them to get onto the grid? Or are they right to be making it as tough as they are?
I mean, obviously Formula One has its own rules. They play by their own rules at the end of the day. I don't think it should be as difficult as it's, to be honest. I think a new team that has got the prowess of them. Obviously, Cadillac have never been in Formula One before, but Andretti is such a famous name in motorsport. Obviously, Mario Andretti, the Formula One world champion and IndyCar champion, everything in between. So I would love to see them on the grid, absolutely. And having a backer like Cadillac, I think, is great as well. I think that I really like Chris Medland said on Grid Talk when he was interviewed by Tom. It can really change the image of the brand, and I think it could do if they do well. I mean, look at Mercedes. Before they've always been involved with motorsport. Obviously, they've always had very fast cars, but when I used to think of Mercedes, to think of luxury cars like Cadillac are as well. So if they have success in this sport, then they could change that image at the end of the day. But I don't like the whole system. I don't know what it was like before, but the fact that all teams have to vote on whether Andretti Cadillac should be allowed into the sport, I don't like that. It seems like in theory they can just veto it, and I don't think it's right at the end of the day, because taking it as a negative viewpoint, the teams could genuinely think, well, another team, that means we've got to share the prize out, we've got to share the TV money out. It's another competitor. I like things how it is now, which does 10, don't you, lads? In theory they could do that. I don't think they will, but they would, and I don't think it should be as difficult as it is. I mean, this bid's been in the making for such a long time, and now it seems to be happening. But this seems like they've had to jump through several hoops on fire backwards while wearing blindfolds to do it, and it's still going on. We don't know. It is if they can manage it, and it shouldn't have to be like that. It should be right. You've got history, you've got backing, you've got finances, you've got drivers. Welcome. I mean, maybe not quite that easy, but Formula One has had 10 teams for a long time now, and I like yourselves, can remember when there were 24 cars on the grid, and going further back, there were 26. And you go further back than that, they had pre-qualifying just to get to qualifying. And F1 should have more teams than it does. There's always going to be competition for grid spaces, but it feels like another 2, another 4 spots for drivers would be very helpful.
Yeah, there's not like a proper entry process that's sort of set in stone at the moment, which I think is making it all very in flux because no one is really quite sure what any new team has to do. And like you say, it could become, I think Scott Mitchell-Mount described it as a cartel. Basically, the teams will just all rally together and be like, no, we're happy with our lot and nobody else is allowed in. But that's the danger with like a franchise system. But then without this system, the teams wouldn't be able to run profitably. It's kind of just, I think it's bad timing at the moment that these teams are just sort of getting themselves on an even keel. And once they start becoming profitable, they might go, actually, we've got enough in reserve and we can let another team in if this was, say, like 4 or 5 years down the line. But I'm all for more competition. I think Andretti coming in would be great because I think they could maybe bring over like a company called like Penske from the States, or maybe Chip Ganassi might take a fancy to it. So you really tap into the American market. And that is what Liberty Media have come in to do, crack America for F1 and then move on and conquer the rest of the world. Now, talking of conquering the world, Fernando Alonso has done that on 2 occasions as a Formula One driver. But he's now joined Aston Martin. And we say F1 silly season is over, but this past week has kind of shown us that F1 silly season is never over because James Vowles has joined Williams from Mercedes, which I think no one saw coming. Fernando kind of triggered all of this last summer, didn't he? So let's start with him. Is he joining a team on the rise, or is this just another meme fest waiting to happen?
Both, probably. No, Fernando. There's always drama with Fernando. I love the guy. Love him or hate him, you can't argue that he's not an influence on the sport. Whether it's a positive influence or a negative influence, we can debate that. But he's definitely an influence. When this move got announced, I thought, well, green is the color of money, and what do Aston Martin race in green? So, but now I think about it, I think that they are a team on the rise potentially. I mean, if you look at the whole season last season, from the start to the finish, with the exception of possibly Mercedes, Aston Martin were the most improved team over that 9-10 months or so. So they are a team on the rise. I do think, obviously, he's money motivated as well. He's going to get a big salary bump with that. It's probably going to be his final move. But I genuinely think he's going there and he's going to want to bring success to the team. A bit like Michael Schumacher going to Mercedes when they first started up. He's going to go there, he's going to set things up, and he's going to make sure that they're running smoothly and all that. But unfortunately, Alonso has a history of doing the exact opposite to teams. So it's a very, very interesting. I'm going to be very interested to see how it plays out. There's going to be some very heated radio debates between him and Lance Stroll because I could just hear Lance Stroll going, "Brad, get him out of the way," and stuff like that. but we all know Nando's going to stand his ground. So there's a few team moves, drivers coming into this season that are very fascinating, and this is absolutely one of them. Yeah,
that dynamic between the drivers is going to be quite interesting, especially considering what happened at Texas in the race last year where they collided. Of course. And Alonso decided, well, I don't think he had much choice in the matter by the end of it, but he was flying towards Mexico. And I think he does tend to have a habit of picking the move that is just worst for his career prospects. If you think about the McLaren in 2007, on paper was a great move. It just didn't work out because some guy called Lewis Hamilton came along, and he's never achieved anything since. The move back to Renault, I mean, that was a kind of needs must. Ferrari, he should have won 2 titles there. And then the move back to McLaren, and that the meme fest that was the Honda years. Then partial retirement. Now back at Alpine. He'll be back at Alpine, Renault, whatever they want to call themselves in a couple of years. I really don't get this move. I think if you're 41 years old and you want to be world champion, you've got to be putting yourself in position to win now. But there really isn't anywhere he can go to win now. So obviously building a team up, but then he's left a team that's just top to the midfield. So none of it makes much sense. Unless, like you say, financially motivated.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely played a part for sure. But I think the team does have genuine potential at the end of the day. I mean, we saw what they used to do when they were back and when they called Force India and going for even further back, Jordan. The team has a real history of overperforming on their budgets. Now they have a budget, and then they are financially up there with the big boys if they want to be, especially with the cost cap that's come in. So there is big potential there. I really do think this. But you're right, it did struck me as like, what, really?
Yeah.
Aston Martin? It's a sideways move at best if you go off the last season, or a backwards move at worst. But it's just all going to depend how the car is going to be this year, because Alpine were a team on the rise as well, but they just flat to deceive so much. They've done it a few times back when they were Renault as well, and they just never quite break into that top. And maybe Alonso's thinking that Aston Martin can, or at least Alpine can't. So he's going to try with Aston.
Maybe there is that glass ceiling in the midfield. You've got to sort of smash through it. And McLaren have hit it and bounced back. Alpine have just hit it. Whether they'll bounce back or stay there is a big question. Perhaps Aston Martin are the team that are able to smash through that, because they're developing their Silverstone base. That's coming for 2024, I think, some of that. So it's all development, and a lot of these teams are positioning themselves. McLaren are developing a new wind tunnel and parts of their infrastructure. So how these teams get their ducks in a row to challenge the big boys is important now. Whether Alonso will be in the sport long enough to see the fruits of that is questionable. Now, Aston's performance director, Tom McCulloch, has said that Alonso will use his competitive character to drive the Silverstone team forward in 2023. Is that just a nice way of phrasing that Alonso won't suffer failure easily?
That is a very politically correct way of saying that. I mean, we all remember Suzuka 2015 GP2 engine. That guy knows how to pick his moments. So yes, I think it is. I mean, he's a guy that obviously had a lot of success, and you'd like to think that Vettel had the same effect when he went to Aston Martin too. Just a motivating factor. I mean, I've never worked in a Formula One team, despite my best efforts. But I can imagine when you have a huge character like that coming to the team, it's got to make you think, right, we've got to get this right, because otherwise Nando's going to be on us. And the thing is, he'd be right to be as well. As harsh as he is, he would be right to be in that kind of situation. There's no way. To my knowledge, the regulations are staying pretty static between this year just gone and this year that's just started. There's no reason why Aston Martin can't keep on the trajectory they've been going. There's no reason why they'll finish top of the midfield this season. But whether they will or not is another matter, because you've got like the likes of McLaren, the likes of Alpine, hell, even maybe the likes of Alfa Romeo. Now they've got the Audi money coming in eventually. Maybe that could have a positive impact on them too. So it's extremely competitive in F1. They could finish on the podium several times next year and still get seventh in the Constructors' Championship. It's that kind of level we're talking about here.
Yeah, especially if there's a few random winners in the field. And we've seen that happen before. You look back to 2021, Esteban Ocon snatching a victory in Hungary and actually beating Sebastian Vettel's Aston Martin on that day, even though Seb was disqualified. Now, talking of random winners, you mentioned Chris Medland earlier on in his chat with Tom Horrocks on the F1 Chronicle Grid Talk podcast Fireside show. Now, Chris...
Full title.
Yeah, the full title now. I was trying to remember the whole thing. Chris said that he thinks Alonso will win a race in 2023. Has Chris Medland lost his mind, or do you share this thought?
I mean, he has suffered an injury, bless him, recently, Chris, but to his hand rather than to his head. I'm taking the mic. I love Chris; he's brilliant. But I think, I watched the podcast that one. I didn't just listen to it. And it just seemed like he just plucked something out of the air there, with the greatest respect to him. But the thing is, if anybody can do it, if anybody can plow in out of absolutely nothing, it's Fernando Alonso. We all know that. He's threatened to do it on a few occasions since he left. Who was the last time he won? It was Ferrari last time he won for. Yeah,
10 years ago.
A few times since leaving those guys. Yeah, literally 10 years ago. Yes, it's been that long. So if anybody can do it, it's him. You know, he's still, despite his age, he's still incredibly quick. He's the most experienced man in F1 history, or one of at least. I think he passed Raikkonen this year, just gone. So if anybody can do it, it's him. I don't think it's particularly likely. I think podiums are definitely on the card. He can definitely pull out a few of those, 100%. But winning, I think it's going to be difficult. I mean, the gap between Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari and the rest is a yawning chasm. And even if it does close somewhat this year, I just don't see it personally.
You'd need a Nürburgring 2007 sort of style event where half the field ends up at turn one and stuck. And then Fernando just like, yeehaw, let's go. I'm just coming through, lads. Now let's talk about Fernando's former team, his three-time former team. I don't think anyone's driven for the same team 4 times in different spells. That would just be outrageous. Pierre Gasly has moved to Alpine. Now, this has been something that a lot of people have talked about ahead of this. I actually predicted it for 2022. So he would join in 2021 for 2022. But now it's happened. It's the super team. And, well, we know how Alpine like to mess around with their management structure, but they've got Otmar Safnauer in there and Esteban Ocon, who doesn't back down from his teammate. Now, Gasly has impressed a lot of people at AlphaTauri. He even won that race back in 2020 in Monza. And his short spell at Red Bull was pretty wretched. What should we expect from the Gasman in his brand new Gasmobile this season?
The new Gasmobile. I think we should expect a very quick driver, someone who is probably going to get to terms with the car pretty easily. Someone's going to hit the ground running, and someone that is going to be absolutely 110% motivated to beat Esteban Ocon. And Esteban Ocon will be 110% motivated to beat Gasly as well. They do not like each other. They have an absolute vendetta against each other from the karting days. I don't know what happened, but something intense must happen because the guys are arch rivals. I know the teams probably sent some pictures out on social media being like, "Oh, look at our 2 French drivers from French teams. Don't they love each other?" You know, but in reality, I don't think they get on at all. You know, and I think when that first incident is going to happen, because it's probably going to happen at some point, they are going to crash on track, or there's going to be some team order controversy or something. As soon as that happens, there's going to be handbag because it's going to be intense. But I think from a purely driving point of view, I think Gasly will do really well. I mean, like you said, some people would point to Red Bull in 2019, but I think a few factors conspired against him there. I think at times he was unlucky. He had Max Verstappen as his teammate, which so the benchmark is extremely high. And also, I just think the car probably didn't suit him. I mean, we've seen that with our team, McLaren recently with Daniel Ricciardo. I don't for one second think that Daniel Ricciardo is a bad driver. I just don't think he suited the car for whatever reason. I think that Gasly suffered the same fate at Red Bull. So I'm hoping it won't happen again at Alpine. I don't know Gasly's and Ocon's driving styles that well, but they're probably quite similar. I imagine they'll probably make a car that could work for both of them. So we'll see. It's going to be interesting no matter what, though, for sure.
Yeah, there might be some cheese and wine flying in the wrong directions behind closed doors if those two aren't seeing eye to eye. And they say they've grown up, but if it's from sort of childhood, this grudge, that's going to be festering deep down. And at the first point of conflict, there's going to be fingers pointed, there's going to be words said. And how Otmar Safnauer manages that, because remember, this is the same guy who didn't manage Sergio Perez and Esteban Ocon particularly well back in 2018 when he was Force India boss. And they kind of got Ocon and Alonso singing from the same hymn sheet in Sao Paulo last year, but I think they were like giving them the proper "you're a pair of naughty boys" chat. So that'd be really, really, really intriguing. And we've mentioned Ocon, and he beat Fernando Alonso last year, which I don't think many people expected. And okay, Alonso suffered several reliability issues, but Ocon wasn't without his share. Is this the most potentially combustible pairing on the grid, or can you think of one that has potentially more fireworks? Maybe Alonso and Stroll. People are pointing to Magnussen and Hulkenberg. you could maybe even throw
Oh,
the Mercedes duo in there. What do you think?
there's definitely potential for some others. Yeah, I would say that Ocon and Gasly are the number one in that regard. But yeah, no, you make a good point. Um, I think Russell and Hamilton could do. I don't think it's particularly likely, but I do think if Mercedes are up there properly this year, challenging for the championship, and you've got Hamilton who's been there a million times before, and you've got Russell who's just starting up in that regard at least, there's potential for some friction there, definitely. And I think it'd be sad, really, because I do think they get on quite well. Um, yeah, obviously, Magnussen and Hulkenberg have previous. They really do. They absolutely do. I don't know though. I do think that since they'll be teammates, they'll kind of just put it to one side. I think they're a bit more level-headed than that personally. I could be very wrong with that though. You're right. They had that good old debate at Hungary 2017, which I went to that race, and when I saw all the group chats blowing up with stuff about them, I thought, oh no, what's happened here? Yeah, so I was laughing on the train back watching all the stuff to do with those two. And yeah, so what was the other one you said other than them?
As a Stroll and Alonso, I mean, obviously they had a collision last year, and
Hmm.
neither of them are shy about defending against their teammates. But then, Ocon and Gasly, well, especially Ocon, he is very robust in his defense against his teammate, and that's something that Otmar Safnauer has mentioned that he needs to improve on in terms of being more flexible in that regard and not fighting his teammate as hard. But then you can argue, the first opponent for a Formula One driver is their teammate, and if they're not going to defend them, as aggressively as everyone else, then that just sets the team up for potentially a driver who's driving within themselves. So maybe you'd rather them crash once.
I don't know. There's defending your position and there's sending someone to Mexico, like you said, when you're at Cota. So I mean, Stroll, you know what? There's times when I think to myself that Stroll's an all right driver and he doesn't deserve a lot of the stuff he gets online, particularly. But then he does moves like that, and I just think I can't believe I defended this guy. He is an experienced driver now. This is what his seventh season, something like that.
He's been on the grid since 2017.
So yeah, this is his seventh full season he's just coming into now. He's an experienced driver. He has driven more races than a lot of world champions in the past. And obviously you've got different races for each season and stuff, and it's increased over time. But still, the guy's been in an F1 car a lot, so he should know how big it is and he should know when to defend. If I was him personally, I would definitely take it a bit easy when Alonso is coming up behind you. But then again, I'm not a Formula One driver, and these guys are competitive animals, especially when the visor goes down in the car.
Yeah, it's very different, obviously, when we're watching from a TV screen and they're sitting there in the moment. If you look at the incident in question in Cota, the timing between Stroll defending and Alonso pulling out from very close behind the Aston Martin was quite small, but obviously the ramifications were massive. So, it's one of those. If he moves a second or two earlier, you don't have the accident. But then, it's up to both of them to drive accordingly. And I think Alonso takes a bit too much slipstream sometimes, so he gets very, very close and pulls out at the last second. And that if you're a less able Formula One driver, that could catch you out. Now let's just talk back to Pierre Gasly and something that the Alpine CEO Laurent Rossi has said about the Frenchman. He said that he can take Alpine to the next level. Is he the superstar in waiting that this team is waiting for, or is he going to be? Is he already what he is in Formula One? He's just going to be a very, very good midfield driver. Can he take this team to a world championship?
I'd say no. I'd say no personally. I don't think he is. I don't think he's much better than Ocon personally. I think he's a little bit like Alonso in a sense. He's a bit more inconsistent, but his highs are very high. Ocon, as we've seen for the last few years. I mean, again, Ocon's a guy that gets stick inconsistency, which I think is a bit ridiculous to be honest. If you look at his scoring record over the last few years, it's incredible. So he's pretty much someone who brings the car home. It's very rare he doesn't finish, and when he does finish, he finishes in the points. And I think Gasly will be on that kind of level too. I don't think Gasly is the kind of superstar driver. I mean, obviously that's been put out in the media to appease the shareholders, to make the fans happy and all this and that, because she will. Because you can't, if Gasly signs and then they say, oh yeah, he's about on the same level as what we had before, maybe a little worse than Alonso, if we're being honest, but he's still pretty good. They can't say things like that. So they have to say stuff like that. But I would disagree with that statement. If Alpine are to win a championship, they'd need someone like a Leclerc or a Russell or hell, even a Carlos Sainz maybe. I don't quite think that Gasly's on that level, to be honest.
It's quite interesting, I think, the journey that Gasly's on, because he's kind of an exception to the Red Bull Junior rule, isn't he? Because he's won that race with AlphaTauri, but then not being able to graduate to the Red Bull team. So if you look at, obviously Max Verstappen won his first race for Red Bull, but he was a race winner waiting to happen. Sebastian Vettel won for Toro Rosso, then he'd already been confirmed as a Red Bull driver by that point. And both Verstappen and Vettel go on to win world championships. Carlos Sainz has had to go away to win a race. Daniel Ricciardo won races for Red Bull. But Gasly has kind of done it the other way around. He got the promotion, got the demotion, then won the race, and now has moved sideways. So it's a very different pattern to the norm you see from a Red Bull driver. I think his progress is going to be really, really interesting, considering he spent so much of his time in F1 with the old Minardi team, Toro Rosso, AlphaTauri. But that 6 months at Red Bull was, I don't think it's as bad as it really was. There's talk of his attitude was not very good, and the way he wanted to problem solve, he just sort of got himself stuck down the rabbit hole. But I think he'll have grown as a person. I think he'll have improved as a driver. And obviously having that race win, that kind of takes the pressure off. And now the pressure will be, can he repeat that feat in a different team? And how well he adapts to the situation. And like we've touched on, that first point of conflict with Ocon will tell us a lot about both drivers and where they're at in terms of how they want this team to be going forwards. Because we've seen these super French teams before, I mean, notably Prost, and they were powered by Peugeot, and it was a disaster. So, I mean, Alpine are one of these teams. They bounce around the midfield, then they win a couple of championships, and then they disappear. They're just, you never know what you're going to get from them. They're just one of those funny teams. And so that brings us to our final driver to talk about, which is Nico Hulkenberg, who returns to a full-time seat for the first time since 2019. Now, we've seen Hulkenberg over the last few years, George, as a super sub at Racing Point / Aston Martin, and he proved himself more than capable. So let's go with the big first question on the Hulk. Is he finally going to get that podium?
Probably not.
That's not what everyone wants to hear.
I know. You know what? I love Hulkenberg. I think he's an underrated driver in a sense. I do think he's labelled with that whole you never got a podium, you're rubbish kind of thing. And he has blown a few chances, to be absolutely frank with the guy. But I think with Haas, it's difficult because I don't see them being that great. I mean, they had a very good start to last year and they just tapered off. And I think this year is probably going to be the same low midfield. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they're up there and challenging and all that, but I don't really see it, to be honest with you. But you never know. They got a pole position last year as well. So, anything can happen in Formula One, and it usually does, as the great Maury Walker used to say. So, Hulkenberg, it would be so ironic if Hulkenberg can finally get that after his career being rescued again by Haas. I think it'd be interesting for sure to see. So I'd love to see it, and I think he's a good driver. I think he's still got it. I think he'd be around the same kind of pace as Magnussen. I think they're the same kind of level, So I would love to see it, but I don't think it's particularly likely. I think there's a lot of teams that are more likely to get a podium, really.
Well, like you say, they did get that shock pole position in Brazil, and stranger things have happened in Formula One. I think that there's just this weird alternate universe for Hulkenberg where he ends up at Mercedes instead of Lewis Hamilton and goes on and becomes a world champion and whatever. And Nico Rosberg is like a multiple world champion, which seems weird.
You've been playing F1 Manager too much, mate.
On F1 Manager, I got Pierre Gasly to win a world championship. So in an Aston Martin,
Of course. Why would it be for anybody else? Yeah,
No,
makes sense.
I thought, no, Alonso, no. Gasly, he's my man. But back to Hulkenberg and Haas, they lost an awful lot of points last year to accident damage on both sides of the garage, I must stress, because Magnussen made friends with the meatball flag. I don't think I've ever really seen the meatball flag thrown out as often as it was last year. I don't remember the last time I saw it before last year. That was utterly bizarre. The regularity in which he managed to receive that flag, it was almost cruel. And obviously Mick Schumacher was fairly accident prone, even though he showed a bit of promise. Will this move of Hulkenberg joining Haas actually push K-Mag to greater heights in 2023? Will it focus his mind a little bit more? Will it take the pressure off? Do you think the first lap collisions were down to him knowing that he had to bag the big points?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure with that one, to be honest. I liked Mick Schumacher, and I want to see him back in F1. I'm glad he's sticking around as the third driver for the Mercedes. I think that's nice. I do think he underperformed at times for sure, and I think Hulkenberg will be more consistent. I don't think he'll necessarily be quicker, but I think he'll be more consistent. So, in a sense, perhaps, yeah. But it's Magnussen. He's always had a crash or two in him, and those crashes that he was involved in were absolutely down to him for the most part. I think he hit Hamilton twice in a couple of races, Spain and Canada, I think it was.
Yeah,
got damage for both of them, and it's just daft. And Magnussen is probably the firmest defender on the grid out of everybody, to the point where when he was driving for Haas before he came back, to the point before where it was downright dangerous at times. So I think he's still got that.
With Roman Grosjean, who was also a firm defender.
Oh, the first lap nutcase, yeah. So yeah. But Grosjean, to be fair to him, he did get out of his system eventually. So maybe it was a little bit of rustiness, maybe it was a little bit of overconfidence, maybe it was just a little error. Driving Formula One cars is difficult. We see people driving cars on the road in the UK that clearly can't drive. So those things are perfectly visible with mirrors and indicators, which people don't seem to use. Formula One cars are a different beast. So
yeah.
I think it'd be better.
That can be a problem. Lewis Hamilton has spoken about how wide they are, and when you go into a pit stop, worrying that you're going to skill the mechanics.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's been a few mechanics who've been really hurt over the years doing that job. I cannot imagine the amount of minerals you need to see a car coming towards you at 50 miles an hour and stand there and not move.
And trust them to stop.
Yeah, literally, that's the thing. 50 miles an hour is quick.
Yeah.
It's not a slow speed. So, but no, to go back to your original question, I think K-Mag will probably be better this year. I think he'll, maybe a little bit of rustiness last year from being out of F1 for a bit and not training and not expecting to be in F1 in 2022. But thank God he came back, because he's been fantastic since he has been.
He's been a breath of fresh air, isn't he? That pole position in Brazil was just that. I said it at the time. F1 needed a moment like that, and in the end, we got a weekend that F1 needed, because we got this maiden pole position for Haas and Kevin Magnussen. We got the maiden wins for George Russell with the sprint and the Grand Prix. And it was just all round such a feel-good weekend after kind of a monotonous domination from Red Bull. And that's not to knock Red Bull by any stretch. Now, Haas team boss Gunther Steiner, the legend that is Gunther Steiner, he said this pairing gets the team back to a similar level in terms of driver pairing to 2018 and 2019, when it was Grosjean and Magnussen. Now, I agree it's a very good pairing. Is there a chance that this Haas pair, if the car is as consistent as it was last year, could they top the midfield? Have they got a pairing that's that consistent?
Well, I mean, they have a driver combination that I'd say is very solid. Yeah, in that sense, they could do it. Like I said, I don't think it's particularly likely given the competition they've got. But one thing I will give a little mention to, though, is that I know that Hulkenberg and Steiner do get on, because I saw them chatting after the British Grand Prix, and they were saying, let's grab a coffee sometime in German, I'm pretty sure. So I heard cafe, and I know that's coffee from my 1 year of basic German. I learned that. Yes. So, but yeah, no, they seem to get on, which is good. I think Hulkenberg and Magnussen will relatively get on as well. I just don't see him topping the midfield personally this year. I just think it's too big of a for them. But they'll have the moments. They'll get some good points finishes. There's pace. There's clearly pace in that car. It's just honing it and making sure that it's consistent enough because the competition is going to be fierce as always.
And it is almost a B-spec Ferrari because they bring in as many parts as the regulations allow them to, and then they develop the rest. And they even produce their own funky side pods to mimic the Ferrari last year. And obviously they had the less dramatic version of porpoising that Ferrari had. So obviously Mercedes having the most dramatic, where it was more akin to a kangaroo or a pogo stick in some cases. But if they can follow that sort of development path, and then they've got a group of people within Maranello, so I'm sure secrets are being dropped on the floor on sweet wrappers, and people are picking them up and going, that's a good idea. Will we borrow that? So if they can follow that sort of path with their car development, they could have a very strong package. And I think they've got a driver combination there with experience and speed. And we've spoken about Alpine, and their duo is a little bit younger in terms of age profile. It's just as quick. You've got McLaren that have Lando Norris, and he is absolutely outstanding. He is a race winner in waiting. And then there's a little bit of an unknown in Oscar Piastri. Where is he going to fall in all of this? And the McLaren tends to be a little bit tricky to drive at times. Valtteri Bottas now for Romeo on their day are very good. AlphaTauri seem to have fallen out in the midfield. So I think there's a definite chance for Haas. I think, like you say, topping the midfield might be a bit of a stretch. I'm going to put you on the spot for the final question of the show. Which of these moves is going to be most successful in 2023 and why?
Right, so we've got Alonso to Aston, we've got Gasly to Alpine, we've got Piastri going to McLaren. We're going
to ignore the rookies. Ignore Piastri.
Oh, we're going to ignore Piastri. Okay.
Ignore Piastri because he's a rookie. So only the three that we've spoken about today. So Hulkenberg, Alonso, and Gasly.
That is a really tough one. That is a really tough one to kind of predict. I'm going to rule out Hulk. I don't see him beating Magnussen by much. So in that sense, it wouldn't be a roaring success. And I think because of the potential for everything to combust at Alpine, I'm going to rule out Gasly as well. I'll go with Alonso to Aston, and I'll say that because A, he's bloody quick, and B, I don't think Stroll's good. I don't think there's going to be much. As we did mention about there being some on-track antics and stuff like that. I don't think they're going to be on the safety track that much. I'll be honest with you. I think Alonso will be a long way ahead. And I think in terms of his experience, he's going to bring to the team and, potentially getting podiums and stuff like that. And just the profile of the outfit as well. I think in that sense, Alonso going to Aston will be the biggest success. But I also think it's got the most potential to end in unceremonious circumstances, shall we say? Because we know what Alonso's like for burning bridges. He's like the way that everything ended at Ferrari, the way that everything ended at McLaren. I mean, Alpine's been a relatively one, I suppose, just because, like you said, he could go back for a fourth time in the future. You never know. So yeah, I'll say Alonso going to Aston.
That's quite interesting. I think, like we touched on, because Aston developed the car very well last year, and they do have a record of achieving a lot with very little, but now they have the budget in terms of the cost cap allowing it, and the infrastructure is growing within the team. Sometimes you can give those sort of teams all that money and all that infrastructure, and they kind of don't know what to do with it. It puts more hoops in the process, so to speak. From my point of view, I'm actually going to go with Hulkenberg. And I'm going to use a word that's been bandied around the Formula One sphere for a different reason. So the word value comes to mind. I think Alonso is going to bring loads to Aston Martin, but I have no idea what they're going to bring for him. And Stroll, you're not quite sure what you're going to get from him. So whether Alonso's move turns out to be a success kind of depends on how good the car is. And if they produce a car like they started last year with, then it's going to be really, really difficult for him. The Gasly-Ocon situation, the combustibility there, and they're both going to be trying to get one over on each other very early on. That is a big risk. But if it's Gasly, then of course he could run away with that team, but I'm not sure Ocon will let that happen. I think Hulkenberg will be the most successful move because he's going to bring to Haas something they haven't had for a couple of years now, because they've had rookies in the car since 2020. And Hulkenberg and Magnussen, as we've said, is a very experienced pair. I don't think Hulkenberg needs to beat Magnussen to make this a successful move and a successful partnership. He just needs to deliver that regular points haul. So when Magnussen does inevitably get his 10th meatball flag of the season, Hulkenberg is there to pick up that 9th place, 10th place. And, if he just picks up 7 or 8 of those and then a couple of big scores around that, he's done his job and he's brought the value that Haas need. And that might be enough to get them from they finished 8th last year, and they could have finished 7th or 6th had they remained consistent. And that, for a team that a couple of years ago we were looking at, how long are they going to be on the grid for? It was every team that we've seen go through a demise. You think back to Caterham and Manor and all sorts of teams before that. All the signs were there of a team that was just going to fall apart and vanish. And then Andretti would have had a walk-in on the grid. So I think if you put Hulkenberg in that car and he can deliver regularly, because he's shown in his ad hoc sub appearances that he's still got the speed and he can adapt to the car, I think he's going to be the one to watch in terms of the drivers moving to a new team that aren't rookies.
I could see that. I can see that. I mean, I think it's definitely the most low risk in terms of both financially and the performance on track as well. And like you said, that's a good point. He doesn't have to beat Magnussen for it to be a success. He just got to steady the ship a little bit. Be there when Magnussen's not. A bit like what Perez does for Red Bull. Nobody expects him to beat Verstappen. Nobody, but he's there to pick up the pieces when Verstappen's out of the race or in the midfield for whatever reason.
Yeah, and we're always surprised when he does beat him, and we're even more surprised when Max doesn't let him through. I'm not sure we should be, given his history. There is always that, and of course, you guys listening and watching can tell us which of these 3 drivers that we have discussed you think will be the most successful for their new team, and why. Leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, or send me a tweet at AHGPPod. George, can we find you on Twitter, the cesspool that is Twitter, to let you know what we think?
You could not. Unfortunately, my profile has been gone for many a year now. So no, if you want to help me out, if you want to follow anybody, follow F1 Chronicle on Twitter. It's just at F1 Chronicle. I might see them in that case, but I don't have a personal Twitter now.
Probably best off out of it. It can be a bit of a dicey place.
I feel better without it. I'll be honest. I've said that many times. I stick by that.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on, George. It's been great chatting to you. And of course, you've been at the Autosport International weekend this weekend. Tell us a little bit about that as well.
Yes, I mean, first time I ever went. Either as a journalist or just a fan. I was going to go last year, but it got cancelled because of the thing we cannot talk about. I mean, it was cool to go. I mean, I've picked up some merchandise and some people on video will have seen. It's very, very good always getting the last season stuff a bit discounted. I'd rather do that than pay the full price at the start, but that's just me. I'm from Yorkshire, so I'm a bit tight. So yeah. No, it was good. I mean, if you're a big motorsport fan, if you love your cars and stuff, they got so much there. It's massive. It's in the NEC in Birmingham. It's huge. You'll not be lacking for stuff to do. So definitely go and check it out if you do go down. And yeah, you can meet some famous people as well. There's some famous faces in motorsport that are going around. And one of the highlights for me was checking out some of the simulator rigs and stuff. I tried out one that was, I think, worth over €30,000, so just under £30,000, and it was very realistic, extremely realistic, to the point where I just could not drive the thing because it was an LMP2 car. And I just think, well, if I was actually put into one of these cars in real life, I would be useless. So I'm spinning out on Silverstone in the game as well.
And you did a video for F1 Chronicle on YouTube where you were looking at the Mercedes simulator. It was like we go into those spaceship things, and it takes you through Star Wars or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There was the Star Wars. I went on that in Universal Studios, I think it was, in Florida. That awesome. I loved that as a kid. But I've never really seen one from the outside before. So I saw people going on that and just thinking, oh my God, I couldn't do that. No way. But yeah, people who went on that would have really enjoyed it. Absolutely. It was a lap of Bahrain with Sir Lewis Hamilton driving in, and just from the angles that thing was doing, they get some serious G forces in there. So yeah, I'd rather, like I said in the video, I'd rather keep my lunch, thank you.
I was watching it and I was waiting for it to just sort of bounce up and down like really violently. I thought that's what it was gonna do. Which would have been
that's the realistic one, yeah.
That would be the real experience. I think maybe that's what they need to do for next year. Excellent. Well, thanks again for coming on, George. It's been great to have you. Always welcome back on the show. And of course, you can see more of me here, AHGP show. You can find me AHGP Pod, Aaron Harper 41 on Twitter. Follow F1 Chronicle on Twitter as well. And George will be hosting. I will be panelisting and possibly hosting if the need arises through this year. We've got like 69 shows, a very nice number of shows this year just for races.
Yes, yeah. There's 3 for each weekend, plus all the fireside interviews that Tom normally does, plus the feeder series sub show that Sophia's going to be doing as well. I don't know what the name of that will be just now, but yeah, so we'll have coverage of F2, F3, and whatever's going to replace the W series as well this year. So yeah, there's a lot of shows. I said before, we're going to crack over 100 shows on this year alone. I think we'll comfortably do that. So there's a hell of a lot of content. Check it out on the usual streaming platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, all that good stuff, and of course our YouTube channel as well, where we live stream them if they're like reactions to qualifying or the race as well. So yeah,
brilliant. Well, I'll see you there, and you'll see both of us there over the year. Checkered Flag is waving on another episode. Leave a big thumbs up on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more Grand Prix content. And thank you very much for watching.